All right, well, we're going to get started. In the interest of time, and those who logged on right at 10:30, welcome to our webinar today. I'm Suzanne Elliott. I'm with Envision Consulting, and we're excited about the webinar today because we're pulling this back big picture, trying to look at what in the world has happened to us this year. What's going on in 2020? Envision, for those of you who don't know, we are a consulting firm focused on nonprofits. We work on leadership and strategy with nonprofit organizations. And over the summer, we issued a survey asking nonprofit leaders, board and staff, what's your experience been like in 2020 since March? You know, what have the challenges been? What have been maybe some of the silver linings? And how are you thinking about the future? So what we're going to do today is I'm going to share some highlights of those survey findings. And we will also give you at the end links so that you can log in, you can download the full survey report. But then beyond kind of the data and the percentages and survey findings, what I think is really even more compelling than data are the stories behind the numbers. And in our recent blog, which we will also send you a link to, we started to dig into some of those stories and hear from different nonprofit leaders about what their experience has been. And today we are going to do that as well in a conversation with 3 nonprofit executive directors we're thrilled to have with us. So we have Mary Donnelly-Crocker, who's Executive Director of Young and Healthy. And I'm going to read the mission statements of the organizations, just in case you're not familiar with these amazing organizations. So Young and Healthy, their mission statement is through prevention, education, family support, and access to healthcare services, Young and Healthy protects and improves the physical and mental health for uninsured and underinsured children and families in the greater Pasadena area. So Mary's joining us today. Thank you, Mary. We also have Anna Rose O'Halloran with us. She's Executive Director of the Antaeus Theater Company. And Antaeus, they're based in Glendale. This is an actor-driven theater company that explores and produces timely and timeless works grounded in our passion for the classics. They illuminate diverse human experiences through performance, training, and outreach. They believe in the transformative power of live theater. So wow, that last sentence of your mission statement is powerful, and I can't wait to hear what that's meant this year. Thank you, Anna Rose, for joining us. And then last but not least, we have Molly Snow, who's Executive Director of Girls on the Run of Los Angeles County. Girls on the Run inspires girls to be healthy, joyful, and confident using a fun, experience-based curriculum that creatively integrates running. And Girls on the Run serves girls across all of LA County. So those are our panelists, and then we're going to get to them in just a few minutes here. But first, we're going to dive into these survey results from Envision survey this summer. And I'll just add, we're going to have Q&A at the end. So please feel free to add any questions you have about the survey or for our panelists in the Q&A. Please use the Q&A, not the chat, just so we can keep track of everything, and we'll address them at the end. So this is just really kind of a highlight. Key topics: programs and operations, revenue, and people. Rosie, you can go on to the next slide. So we received survey responses from 149 respondents. About 67% were staff, 20% were board members, and other kind of different allegiances, affiliations with organizations. 70% of our survey respondents were based in California. We also had respondents from across the country. It was interesting to see. We had people from New York, from Chicago, Denver, DC, Philadelphia. So kind of interesting that other 30% to hear their perspectives as well. Really like wide range of budget sizes and mission areas represented in our survey respondents. Some of the things that were really consistent though, change. 98% of our survey respondents said that they have changed the way they deliver their programs and services since March. Which, on one hand, I think about that and think, well, of course, everyone's lives have changed. How we live our lives have changed so dramatically since March. But really, for nonprofits, for like nearly 100%, I am curious about the 2% who didn't change at all. To change how you deliver programs and services, that is just a revolutionary experience in just a matter of weeks. So we can't underestimate what that change has meant for our sector and for our individual organizations. And then when we asked just an open-ended question, this is not a checkbox and question, we asked, what is your biggest concern as you think ahead? As you think about the rest of 2020, you think ahead to 2021 and beyond, 38% said financial sustainability is the major thing. That, in the past, 7 months, or at the time they took the survey, it was 5 or 6 months, been focused on how do you remotely work? How do you think about, taking care of the health and safety of your clients and your staff? How do we make this huge pivot in our program delivery? And those things are going to continue to some degree to be concerns, but the biggest thing that's keeping nonprofit leaders up at night is financial sustainability. So let's get into some of the details. So in kind of the programs and operations bucket, we asked about demand for programs and services, and 47% saw an increase in demand for their programs and 33% saw a decrease. And, digging into it a little bit more, the increase in demand was really primarily around basic needs, food, shelter, also mental health services. The demand for those services went up quite a bit. And the decreased demand was kind of multifaceted. For some organizations, that was just driven by the situation. Facilities closed and they simply weren't able to deliver their programs and services, which then led to a lack of delivery and demand. So some school-based programs, for instance, in arts and culture, facilities closing, theaters closing, museums closing, led to decreased numbers, of course. So it's on one side. And then on the operations piece, big investments in technology over the past 6 months. And many organizations telling us, oh gosh, we knew we needed to invest in technology long before the pandemic, and we had to just find a way to some degree work with what we have, but also quickly, through foundation support, in-kind support, board members stepping up, get our technology to where it needed to be for our staff to be able to potentially work remotely, maybe deliver our programs remotely, and so on. So real increase in technology over the past 6 months, but most organizations also telling us, okay, we've been able to make this work, but if this continues to keep going like this, we're going to need to continue investing in technology. We didn't suddenly revolutionize our technology infrastructure in the past few months. We've cobbled it together, but we're going to need more investment. And then when we asked about remote work, we heard positives and negatives from leaders saying, there actually were some positives in a lot of ways. Employees not needing to commute, it took some pressure off. And certainly living in Southern California, some ways that's a positive. Some people felt even a little more connected to colleagues going through a crisis together, and sometimes having a daily call with everyone all in one place on the screen can kind of really bond people. At the same time, there's tremendous stress, and people are dealing with their lives as they're working from home, and that's a lot of pressure, and also just not having that kind of water cooler working face to face has its disadvantages. And then also and those are some of the things that I think, if we were to talk to businesses in corporate America, we'd probably hear some of those similar positives and negatives about staff working from home. For nonprofits, I think there's also another particular nuance that we heard, and that is for a lot of organizations that remained open, that were essential nonprofits providing services, there's kind of this divide between the staff who were still serving clients, still in facilities, and those who are working from home, and trying to bridge that gap, address equity issues, really deal with morale there was another kind of nuance that we heard in the survey. And then, this kind of goes back to programs a bit, but we heard in the survey over 30% of organizations in the survey said that they're actively considering some type of strategic restructuring. So for example, a merger, or some kind of joint programming or back office consolidation, really actively considering that type of option for their organization. And while we didn't ask this question a year ago, I would venture an educated guess that that number would have been far less a year ago. And this is reflected too in the calls that Envision's receiving. Not just the straight, we're considering a merger, we need some help, but also when we're getting calls about leadership transition now, increasingly we hear, our CEO is retiring or is leaving. We're considering a search to replace them. We're also thinking about a merger. So that, we think at, at kind of a macro level is a real change and trend in the sector. Rosie, we can go on to the next slide. So on the revenue side, as you can imagine, I think probably as a lot of you experience, some mixed, ups and downs on the revenue side. Foundations have provided a lot more flexibility in general for their current grantees in terms of not as many restrictions, not as many reporting requirements, some additional funds. But for new grantees, it's been much more mixed, and we're hearing from more organizations it's been tougher to get new grants from foundations, especially if it's not in kind of disaster relief, pandemic response category. So overall, private foundations, have stepped up, but what does that look like next year and beyond? No one really knows. On the corporate side, we do know organizations, have seen an increase in terms of pandemic response, corporate donations in kind and financial, and also in response to the racial equity movement and real increase we've seen since June. But kind of overall in our survey, 35% of our respondents saw a drop in corporate giving. So there have been some bright spots, but overall a decline in that area. I'll go to the next slide, Rosie. With individual giving, it's been kind of fluctuated. It's been interesting to watch the trends month to month. There were some increases at the beginning, then some declines, then it went up again. 40% of our survey respondents said they've seen an overall increase in individual giving, but 34% decreased. So it's been a bit mixed. Overall, we see in the sector nationally online giving up by almost 40% since March. But in terms of who's doing well with this, we're seeing that organizations with the most success in individual giving this year have really had a comprehensive donor relations strategy. It's not kind of single asks, but it's keeping their donors in the loop, being transparent about what their situation is, and then being really targeted and saying, this is what we need and here's how you can help. On the event side, wow, is pretty much all I can say. So many of our conversations early in March and April were around events because everyone realized, oh my goodness, we can't have this gala this year, or, run or fill in the blank in-person fundraising event. So we had 40% of our survey respondents canceled a fundraising event since March. Now, over 50% saw a decrease in event revenue. The but there is that for most organizations in our survey and who we've kind of been speaking with, virtual events have exceeded their expectations. And I think for some of those organizations where they have long-standing events, sponsorships and some of the fundraising for those events happened before March, which was great. Or they, did a really good job of cultivating, longtime event donors to continue giving this year. And virtual events really have kind of surprised people by their engagement as well as their fundraising success. Now, is that going to continue? Is this like the shiny thing of 2020? Will we be able to keep it going? How will we have to change it to keep people's attention? That's a whole separate webinar, I think. But, events certainly has a big trend this year. Rosie, you can go on to that last slide. So on the people side of things, and I really shouldn't have the people slide last. It really should be first because our people are our organizations. The groups we surveyed saw, oh, I'm sorry, Rosie, one more slide. Okay. 28% did do layoffs since March. But we heard in our survey also 36%, at least this summer, anticipated hiring more program staff at some point this year, in the second half of the year. So kind of the whys behind that, I think are varied, from you getting some increased funding to support program delivery, and just demand going up. But we do know layoffs have been a big part, and furloughs have been a big trend for our sector this year. Partially offset by PPP loans that organizations have received, but still a tremendous impact on our workforce. And we did hear that 49% of boards, or of our survey respondents, reported that their boards became more engaged since the pandemic. And 35% said engagement stayed about the same. So we see that as a real positive. Anytime we hear board engagement going up by that much, it's fantastic for the sector and a great opportunity to look ahead and say, okay, boards, we need you, like not just when there's a true emergency and crisis, but how can we keep this engagement up going forward? And then last but not least, in our survey, almost half, 49% of organizations reported that they initiated new diversity, equity, inclusion efforts since June, and kind of a wide range of examples depending where the organizations were in this work before June, but from trainings to really looking at hiring practices and board recruiting, developing partnerships, even really digging into programs and how to make programs more equitable. So that's a really exciting finding from the survey. So those are highlights of what we found. Rosie, we can go ahead and take the slides down. And what we're going to do now is transition into, I think, the much more interesting part of this webinar, which is going to be hearing from these three amazing nonprofit leaders about their experiences this year and how they're thinking about the future. So what we're going to do is each one of them is going to just share a bit with all of you about how the organization has been impacted by the pandemic, by overall situations in 2020, and what they're thinking about for the future. And then we'll have Q&A afterwards. So Mary, could I ask you to get started?
Good.
Yes.
Okay. A few clicks of the button and we're good. So hello everyone, my name is Mary. I am the Director of Young and Healthy in Pasadena. And Young and Healthy provides access to health care to low-income kids and their families with a cadre of about 350 volunteer doctors. We see kids at no cost. In addition, we have lots of prevention and education programs. So you would think in a pandemic that a healthcare program would be like insanely busy, right? You would think that. And we are insanely busy, but not doing what you think. We took a big hit almost immediately because when the pandemic hit, our schools closed, of course, and that is our conduit for referrals. So overnight, the faucet for referrals got turned off. And just to make it more fun, doctors' offices all over the country closed overnight. So even if we had gotten a referral, what would we have done with them, right? It was very tricky. We did get some referrals and it was very tricky to find a service for those kids at that time. So our referral stuff went just down, terribly, awful. Our staff started to do welfare calls. We started to just call our families and say, how you doing? And we did about 1,500 calls of our most recent clients. And that revealed some pretty interesting stuff, some pretty dramatic needs that we were able to jump on and help with. But actually that was really us. We've always just waited for people to call us, but now we are calling them. And that's a big shift in how we've done business. We moved all of our educational services that we could to a virtual format, and those also dried up immediately. Nobody was doing any education at all. It's starting to really pick up now, but we changed everything to a virtual format. And of course, the thing all of you have had to figure out is like, how do you manage staff when you don't see them, and how do you keep morale up, and all of that. Those are huge issues, and I'm sure all of you probably have the same experiences. Some of the big hits for us had to do with foundation funding. Some of our tried and true foundations that have funded Young and Healthy for years and in big numbers, not a $5,000 grant, a $100,000 grant, completely changed direction. And they were only going to do pandemic relief, and somehow they didn't think health counted. I don't know where that thinking comes from, but I think health is part of pandemic relief, but I'm not the purse strings. So we got these couple of big hits of big foundations that changed, and nobody could have seen that coming. Our board, it was really interesting. In the very beginning, we had a lot of meetings about money and under, a lot of if-then conversations, but if we hit this number, we'll do this. If we hit this number, we'll do this. With a plan actually not to do anything really dramatic, like laying people off, and probably till having the conversation around December. So that is yet to come. But then the other thing that was interesting about the board relations was the board, in some ways, got very active in trying to take care of the staff, which was really nice. When we were in the throes of, especially in the beginning when nobody knew what was going on, some board member bought everybody on the staff gift cards for takeout for a restaurant. They sent us flowers. They, sent little love notes to us. They did a funny video for us. The board did and sent it to us. So they really were conscious of the stress we were under, probably not as much as we were, but still, they really did try and reach out to us, which was really nice. And I don't think everybody had that experience, but we did. The other thing that was kind of funny was that during the last several months, our board kind of goes dark over the summer. So we don't really normally see them. I mean, not much anyway. But that was when a lot of stuff started like cranking up, and we started doing all these new programs and doing all this stuff. And suddenly I realized, hey, we're doing all this stuff and we haven't told the board. Oops. And so we had to kind of backtrack and get back in communication with the board. And we did I'll tell you in a minute a little bit of the stuff we've done. But some of the stuff that is new to us that we weren't doing before is we got into pandemic relief things. We now collect laundry detergent and distribute it, diapers, headsets, toothbrushes. We weren't doing that kind of stuff before. And now it's a part of our everyday life at Young and Healthy. We are one of the lead agencies in Pasadena trying to bring COVID testing, free COVID testing to Pasadena, and especially to the poorest neighborhoods in our community. And amazingly, after jumping through 8,000 hoops of fire, it's going to start next Monday. So that was something, I certainly didn't know how to do COVID testing, didn't know which it was involved. Well, now I know. Those kinds of things. We had to change our signature programs, things that are tried and true with us. And some of it still isn't working, honestly. It's still not working. And some of it has to do with cybersecurity. Although we are able to pivot and help and do a lot of our things through the schools in a virtual format, the schools aren't ready for us to do that because of cybersecurity. And so we have not been able to get back into the school system in a virtual way, which has been more than frustrating. Do you want me to talk about Post-it notes now, Suzanne, or you want me to wait?
Why don't you go ahead and explain that now? Because I think that'll be a good conversation for us later too.
Okay. So one of the things as we started to get a little bit busier again, the program director and I, who work really closely together, we both realized that we were both feeling completely overwhelmed. The kind of overwhelmed that you hang up from a meeting and you feel like you're going to burst into tears, just completely overwhelmed. And we both were feeling that way. And it took us a few days, probably meetings, for us to admit to each other, because we're all trying to have a stiff upper lip and be good leaders and role models. But the two of us were really overwhelmed. So we actually, in person, with masks on, 6 foot apart, came to the office and we started doing what we're calling the Post-it note exercise. And we wrote on Post-it notes every single thing that we are doing, single thing that we have to do. There's a grant requirement or something. We looked at all the things we had to change that completely changed our operations. And we looked at all of those things. And then we looked at what could we start doing, what should we stop doing, and what should we continue doing. Along this exercise for the two of us, the program director, Whitney, asked a brilliant question just of the two of us, I thought. And her question was, let's go to the darkest place ever. And what would happen if we really closed in 6 months? What if we don't survive this? What if we have to close? What would, even just the beginning, just the two of us, look back on the last 6 months and say, it was still worth it? And that was more of a psychological exercise for Whitney and I, but it really did help us feel like we were doing an okay job for the community, even though I think most of us felt completely inept in a lot of ways during all of this. And the things that we came up with was that it would still be worth it if we closed. To look back and say, we helped relieve burdens for the community. We helped provide hope and connection for people who were disconnected. And we provided really tangible support for people. And so even if we closed up shop, we could still feel proud of those things that we did in the last 6 months. Now, we're not closing up shop in 6 months, but I think that that exercise for us helped us feel okay about the job we were doing. Then, after we had kind of got our own act together, we invited 2 key board members into the identical conversation. And we looked at all the Post-it notes, all the things that they thought were important. What should we be counting now? We have to count things differently, right? And really had this frank discussion with a couple of the board members who said, we can't, if we just look at our numbers the way we always have looked at them, we're gonna look like we failed this year. We're gonna, it's, you know, when your referrals are down 200%, well, that doesn't look good, right? And we're gonna look like a failure, and we're gonna feel like failures if we keep counting things the way we always did. And so we, with their help, with a couple of our Smarty Pants board members, we really kind of grappled with that and tried to figure out what should we be paying attention to and what can we let go of for now? What can we just say, oh, well, it's a pandemic, we'll pick that up later. And so we then narrowed it down some, and then those 2 board members did a board presentation on this and then got the board engaged in a different way. First, just catching them up with what was going on, but then also really illustrating just how much everything had changed in sometimes some kind of graphic detail that the board doesn't usually know. But to really illustrate it, we had to tell them how some of this stuff and how detailed some of this is. From that, some great stuff came out of it. We have a little group now that's working on marketing and PR because we don't even have that in our budget, right? And helping us, how do we tell this story now? A little group formed. So that was a way of engaging the board in a completely different way. I think for the staff, we were quasi-terrified that they're going to say, it doesn't matter, the numbers matter. I mean, that's your deep fear, is that they're going to say it doesn't matter. But that isn't what they said at all. We got so much support from the board saying, oh my gosh, at least you didn't crawl in a hole, curl up and die, because our program shut down. I mean, we were there every day, working every day, but really the things we do every day just stopped for a while. And they were saying, you know, you could have just thrown up your hands and said, well, that's it, we're over, it's done with. But instead we shifted and did some other things. So I think it actually ended up, all the struggles that we presented to the board, I actually think helped them feel proud of us and proud of what the organization is doing, which as an employee, you know, really helps when your bosses like you. It really helps. Let's not fool anybody. We like it when our board likes us, right? So I think those are some of the things that we did, and I think I'll end there.
Thanks so much, Mary. That was really, really interesting, especially hearing about that Post-it note exercise. I think is fascinating, and that conversation that it led to with your board. Anna Rose, love to hear from your perspective, looking at kind of the theater, and maybe some. I feel like there are going to be some similarities and some differences in your experience.
Yes. Good morning. I'm Anna Rose O'Halloran, Executive Director of Antaeus Theater Company. As Suzanne shared, we're based in Glendale, California, at the Kiki and David Gindler Performing Arts Center. We are an intimate theater company. We have 2 performance spaces. One is an 80-seat house, and the other is a 36-seat black box. We normally do 4 productions a year, so that's where the live theater piece comes in, as well as readings throughout the year that the general public comes to. And then we have some other programming too that I'll talk a little bit about how we've managed each of those. We do an arts education program in 4 schools, well, 3 schools in Homeboy and downtown, which is a writing and performance-based arts education program. We have an academy, which is acting classes that we were housing in person. And then we also have a playwrights lab where we have a group of playwrights that meet once a week and work on new pages in our library. We have 160 artists, so I think that's important to know. That's where the actor-driven piece comes into the theater company. And we were founded in 1991, so actually 2020-21 was supposed to be our 30th anniversary. So we were gearing up for a big in-person gala and doing a lot of fundraising around our 30th anniversary, and we definitely have had to shift our focus in this pandemic. So when the pandemic hit in March, we had a show that had just opened, Measure for Measure. We were in the middle of casting our next show, which was The Time of Your Life. And we decided to close the doors when everything was kind of coming at us about what was going on. I think we were very lucky though, because all of our staff worked on laptops. So we had a very easy transition to sending everyone to their houses to work. We actually had a couple people who were working remotely already. So we used like Google Chat, and that's the main way that we communicated, even though our staff is all in one tiny office. So people even chat when they're in the office so that they wouldn't disturb each other. So I think that we actually faced a really easy transition from the staffing side. We did have to lay off our front of house and stage managers just because of lack of work. And so my main focus when all of this happened in March immediately became financials and shifting our programming. Our executive committee started meeting very regularly to look at our cash flow, which was a big concern for us. My number one priority became keeping my staff on, because I knew that if we were going to survive this and be able to offer any kind of alternative programming, I needed the staff in place to put new programming in place. So we did apply for the PPP loan. We also applied for the EIDL loan to the Small Business Administration. Our foundations were really wonderful. We had some that had already come in that reached out to us about transitioning our funding into general operating support. And we had a couple of requests that were in. And when we reached out to those foundations, they asked us what we needed. We said general operating, and they were able to transition our funding requests. And then our other major focus became dealing with our donors. We have a really amazing involved individual donor base. And so there was this really sweet spot that I kind of missed, where everyone was sitting around not knowing what to do and were willing to take Zoom meetings. So we were on the phone, our artistic director, our director of development, and I met with our individual donors one-on-one and got to have conversations about what our plan was. I mean, it was not very strategic and thought out. We just kind of were sharing and being transparent about where we were and what our thinking was. But it was this really amazing time to spend one-on-one with our donors and hear about what they loved about the organization that we don't normally have the time to do. And then the other side is our programming. I think our arts ed was interesting because obviously all of the schools shut down and all of the teachers were trying to figure out how to transition to online learning. And so that is a piece that we just kind of decided to give up on our arts ed programming for the spring. We are still trying to figure out what that will look like in the fall. Our academy, we transitioned online, which was really interesting with acting classes. We did a lot of, I think with our audiences and our students, being very willing to refund money, which I think brought people closer to us, and a lot of people kind of stuck it out. And we've heard interesting things about the academy and the learning that has taken place over Zoom. And then our lab also continued to meet online. So they were working on new pages. That was kind of from March to May. And then the George Floyd murder happened in May, which brought about the social justice movement and the Black Lives Matter. There was a big thing in the performing arts world called We See White American Theater, where BIPOC artists from around the country talked about the future of the theater and how to be equitable. And I think that really shone a spotlight on some things for us. And so we then transitioned to dealing with EDI. We were already in the middle of a strategic plan where we had identified a value of inclusivity for our organization, but the artistic directors and I went through we have 6 pillars that we're working on, and every program that we had, and really looked at it with an anti-racist lens to develop a roadmap for this year that we have shared with the company and board. And then one of the other things that we started is hosting some facilitated conversations with our company internally. So that is taking place. So I think those 2 things were most of our focus over the last 7 months. And then you know, what we have been doing about our long-term ongoing programming is that we are really concerned about keeping our community engaged. The performing arts are looking at a very long road ahead of when people will be even able to return to the theater or willing to return to the theater. Broadway just came out last week saying they're not coming back before the end of May, which may even be ambitious. So we are trying to develop some programming to keep our donors and audiences engaged. We have a big program this fall that we're doing. Because we have that lab, we were able to commission our playwrights to write plays that are zip code specific to Los Angeles, because we were hearing a lot from those individual giving meetings, how important community was to everyone. And so we wanted to focus on the diverse neighborhoods in Los Angeles and communities that people know and love. So we have written 6 plays that are going to be audio plays that are coming out. And that is what the team is focusing on right now. We not only are going to release the audio plays, but we have a huge engagement strategy that we're building out around that I would have never been able to do if we weren't able to keep the staff on. So that is where we are at right now.
Wow, thank you. That is fascinating and inspiring. We had a comment in the chat that this is also inspiring, and it really is. Anna Rose, I meant to ask, so how many staff did you have at the beginning? I know you said you had some layoffs for the front staff.
Yeah, it's so interesting because we had just brought the front of house team on as employees because of AB5. So I think we were around 15 or 16 staff members, and we now have 8.
Okay, great. Molly from Girls on the Run. Love to hear from you.
Well, good morning. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Envision and Suzanne. This is inspiring. It's a great conversation, and I'm super glad to be a part of it and loving hearing from my colleagues. I don't know, somehow we feel less alone, don't we? When we know that we are all actually going through a lot of the same struggles. And I'll try to be brief so that we have time for Q&A, especially because a lot of what I would say has already kind of been touched upon by my colleagues. So I just do want to add that, so Girls on the Run, for those of you who are not familiar, it's a positive youth development program. And we use a curriculum that really leverages and relies upon interpersonal and physical activities to improve social, emotional, and of course, physical health and well-being for young girls. So it's ages 8 to 14. In order to deliver the curriculum that we do deliver, we rely very heavily on 2 very key components that we were sort of stripped of by this pandemic. One is peer-to-peer interactions between the girls themselves, and the second is an adult mentorship component that is reliant on volunteerism. So we use volunteers to actually lead our program. In a normal season, in a normal time, in a normal life, we would do this mostly after school on campuses or sometimes in parks or community centers. And we would serve about 950 to 1,000 girls, and we would leverage about 250 adult mentors per season. We do that twice a year, mirroring the school year. So just for a little perspective of where we started with all of this. So we were interrupted like everybody else. We had to shut down immediately like everybody else. I mean, schools were closed. We had no options there. Parks were closed. So we shifted very quickly, not super gracefully, but quickly, to an online program. And when your program is designed as is theater and as is the healthcare services we already heard about, when you're used to something that really requires, or I guess doesn't require it, but you're used to delivering it in a way that is in person, trying to figure out how to transition online, it was really challenging for us. It just took away so many of the elements that we love most about the program. We did learn a ton, and luckily for us, our cycle mirrors the school year, so we had the summer to sort of take out some of the clunk. So we were able to, I think, get ourselves to a place where, not knowing when we'd be back in person, we could do a virtual program that actually was much more meaningful and felt a lot more like the original program and could achieve its original objectives. That was the first thing we did, was the transition. I will just add, I think everybody felt this. It was very, very hard to transition, because when you're dealing with school-age kids and already parents are struggling just to figure out how to get them educated via Zoom, having another Zoom thing really fell to the bottom of their radars. So our service fell off in the spring. And there just really wasn't anything we could do about it. We stayed online and showed up because we felt like that was important for the girls and the families, but it was really hard for them to get there and take advantage of what we were offering. So the second thing we did after getting online was a very much less sexy Post-it note thing. So our exercise wasn't as cool as Mary's, but what we did was basically got real with financials. You know, Anna Rose, you talked about this. We had to run a best, a likely, and a worst case scenario for our finances, because we really didn't know when we were going to be back in person. And our financial model, our business model, is partly dependent on fees that are paid by families who can't afford to participate in the program. Lots of families are subsidized, but some families do pay, and it is a part of our business income. So when our program stopped, and we did not know when it would restart, we had to really take a very close look at our revenue. And so I think the phrase Mary uses, we went to our darkest of places. That was our worst case scenario, right, with our financial modeling. The finance committee of my board is CPAs, and so we spend a lot of time looking at what that would really mean for us and what do we need to do now to emerge from this long term. That was a really hard process, and the outcome of that is nothing that this is not the inspiring part. It's the really, really hard realities of it, is that we lost 2/3 of our staff. We were rolling into our quiet time anyway, where we normally do not have a lot of income coming in. So we had to make decisions that were for the good of the organization on the whole. Very challenging. I think we did it as best we could. We really tried to honor everybody who was working for us, but I'm not kidding. If that's a part I never have to relive again, that would be great. I would just say too, revenue wise, we're still kind of learning the final impacts of revenue, because we are a seasonal program, and for us, we really need a full year to know what the full outcome will be, especially for our earned income, but even for contributed income. So we don't really know yet, but we did make some changes to try to adapt there. And for us, that was very, very new, because we were not used to events online or virtual events, which I know now is the norm. But we did adapt there and have offered some opportunities for people to participate in a virtual film festival, for example. That was a fundraiser for us. We started doing things like selling our merchandise online, which is not something we would normally have tried to tackle at our size of an organization. So we really did try to adapt, but I think it's still a little unknown. Those things that I just mentioned as very specific examples, those are not going to replace income lost from either the program or from foundation grants. Like Mary was saying, some of those big funders stepped away. We definitely experienced that. I guess what I'll say is, as like the positive piece, because I don't want to feel like the doom and gloom of it. You know, honestly, what I'm so proud of us for doing is making hard decisions early when everybody knew they were coming, and just making sure that what we were thinking about as an organization was our responsibility to our communities and to our girls, and that through all of this and making those hard decisions, our sustainability, our chances increased. We're not going anywhere either. Our doors are not closing anytime soon. But I do think a lot of that, I give credit to the fact that we made hard decisions early, and now we wait to see how we can restore ourselves. And as we restore our program, we can restore our staff. We did enter this fall with the program back with 2 different models. We have a virtual model and we have an in-person model, and the in-person model has been hugely successful. So we are seeing that there is a real need for interpersonal connections, especially if you can do it in a safe way, outdoors and socially distanced and with masks. It's new for us, it's new for everybody, but it gives me hope that the program will thrive, especially like rolling into spring.
Thank you, Molly. And it is so interesting. Thanks to all of you for sharing really candidly what your experiences have been. And it is interesting to see 3 organizations that on the surface, when you hear your missions, pretty different. But you are all kind of similar sized organizations, kind of small to mid-size in terms of revenue and staff. And here's some of the similar experiences that you've had. I think it just speaks to, the nonprofit sector often, we are more alike than we are different in a lot of ways, even with different revenue models. You know, it really is true. So we're going to move into some Q&A. We have a question, and participants, if now's the time, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. But we do have a couple to get started. So Michelle asked about budgeting, and Molly, I think you just spoke to this a bit in what you talked about. But you know, whether you're a calendar year, fiscal year, or kind of June to July to June, Anna, Rosemary, how have you approached or are approaching budgeting for either kind of this new fiscal year you're in or the upcoming fiscal year?
I can answer some of that. We're July 1st fiscal year. So at the time when we, were planning the next year, that's like March and April, we were worried, of course. So we created our regular budget, and then we created a couple of other budgets. If things get a little bit bad, then this is what we might cut. If it gets really bad, this is what we might cut. The other thing that we did, but we approved the basic budget. Actually, the board approved the budget based on kind of our previous reality, even though we knew we'd probably make adjustments. And we made some timing decisions too, like we wouldn't make any big decisions until after our virtual gala in October. We probably wouldn't look at staffing until December. So that would all stay the same until then. One of the things that was continues to be a really hard conversation is not just about the money, but the productivity, right? So because our stuff just dropped out, the question came up with the board is, why are we paying people if we're not doing case management, right? What are we doing? And so we have been hustling to create new things for ourselves so that we do have that. But the other thing that we had a huge advantage was that since the last recession, we've been working really hard to build a reserve. And we had, the June before, we had actually, for the first time ever in our little lives, actually been able to invest money. And we had never done that before. And we have 3/4 of a year in an investment account. It's not an endowment, it's just an investment account. So the board, after a lot of discussion, decided that's what that money's for, right? This is the rainy day money. It's raining. So we committed at that point, before the budget was approved, we knew there would likely be a deficit in revenue, that we would commit 1/3 of our reserve to operations if it's needed, right? So we would take 1/3 of the money that we have in reserve and just pop it right into the budget. Basically as kind of internal revenue if we need it. Now we haven't done it yet, but we know that the board will allow us to do that if that happens. So that gives us a big cushion. That's why I knew we wouldn't really close in 6 months, is because we have 3/4 of a year of operating reserve. Now we don't want to deplete that whole thing, believe me. But we actually, at the beginning of the year, with all the financial forecasting, we actually thought we might actually be able to stay afloat for 2 years, even if this continues in a really bad way. We thought maybe with our own reserve, we might be able to stay afloat for 2 years. So that was lucky. I mean, and it was a lot of work to build that up, because in the last recession, we were down to like at 0. And so it took us 10 years to build that back up. But that was something that I'm very grateful that we did. And that we didn't spend that money on other things sometimes that I wanted to spend it on. And that somebody was smarter than me and said, don't do that. So, we had a lot of tough discussions, and we'll probably have some more about that.
Thanks, Mary. And we've heard from a number of organizations that similarly said 2008, 2009, that was so bad for us that we built up our reserves, and thank goodness we did. Mm-hmm. Anna Rose, do you have any thoughts on the budgeting question?
Sure, I'll answer just quickly. We're a September 1 start, so we just finished our fiscal year at the end of August. And we, in the trends, it's interesting, we actually saw an increase in individual donors. We got like 200 new donors in that time frame, which shows really good growth for us. But budgeting for this year, we had a 3-year financial model that was built out as part of our strategic plan so we had a bit of a template. And what we really did is look at our expenses and cut anything that we didn't feel we needed. I mean, we went line by line in our budget. And we have a couple of new positions that we're looking to hire this year, actually. Because we have some new programming that we put in place as part of our EDI roadmap. So we are just being very conservative, I'm sorry, I can't say the word, conservative about it. You know, I had one of those positions as a fall hire, but we are still trying to find some funding for it. So I am holding off on hiring it. So I'm just taking it kind of month by month. Making sure that our expenses are aligning with what we see coming in. And I have an amazing director of development. We have lots of conversations about like, let's not get the board scared. I need you to get some money in the door, making sure that we have a very healthy bank account. We do not have an amazing reserve like Mary. I wish we did.
But it works right when you do scenario planning, financial scenario planning, and we work with clients on this. It's the revenue and the expense side. So you have to do like Anna Rose, the line by line. Absolutely. You have to put a really critical eye, line by line, detail by detail. And then on the revenue side, you have to do the same. And maybe you do have some of that rainy day fund you can move over, but also like where might there be some flexibility in the revenue? So Anna Rose, I'm going to stay with you for a moment because we had a question in the Q&A that actually speaks to, you mentioned you have 200 new donors who have come in, and Larry asked us a question about how in the world do you reach new donors in this environment? So any thoughts on how was that a strategy to go out and get new donors? Was it just kind of, it happened? What are your thoughts on that one?
It's interesting. I mean, we are on like I have said, we are on part of the strategic plan. So we were already on a path about growing our fundraising and have put new staff positions in place. So I feel like, honestly, our timing is very lucky. We have had that director of development in place for just a little over a year now. We hired a development associate this year, which was part of our strategic plan. So she was able to just like transition most of her time to applying for all these new grants that were coming up as part of COVID. So we've been going after a lot of COVID funding. But from the individual side, I think a piece of it for us, which not everyone has this, is we had ticket buyers. So we did a big thing about trying to get ticket buyers to convert their tickets into donations. And then we also, as part of our end of year strategy, went to those donors and tried to get them on as new funders.
That's great. We have a question from Katie that I think this is a really great question. I think maybe all three of you will have some thoughts on this or different perspectives on it. Her question is, how far in advance are you thinking about virtual programming? Are you planning for virtual programming? And then how are you balancing that with, are you starting to plan for a return to in-person programs and services? And how do you manage that with, your staff, spend half of your time thinking about how to re-enter into in-person and half of your time still maintaining our virtual, or like, how are you all thinking about that? How are you planning for it? I think, Molly, I know for Girls on the Run, you've already have both virtual and in-person now starting this fall. So you're already living that. So I know maybe Molly, we could start with you on how you approach that and how you're continuing to wrestle that one.
Well, I start by shaking a magic 8-ball. If you do not have one, you definitely should get one. And after that tells me nothing useful. Basically, I don't know, Katie, that's such a good question. I would say what the approach we've taken is we tested it this fall. And what was really important for us this fall was calling it like testing. We changed the metrics for success. We did not stick with our former strategic plan and say we have to hit those numbers. We changed everything and said, if we do anything at all, we're going to be proud of ourselves. And so that was helpful. And so we were able to test some things out. And one thing that was super clear for us is that the demand is much, much higher for something in person, much, much higher. And so thinking ahead, we will be planning for the general COVID environment to be the same in the spring, to be honest. We're assuming that not much will change and that we will just increase the opportunities that we provide to families for in-person programming. So we're ramping that up now. I mean, within the next 2 weeks, we will kick off our spring planning, even though we haven't even finished our fall program. And I'm not sure if that's really exactly answering your question, but
yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's really interesting. Mary or Anna Rose, do you have any thoughts on that one?
We aren't planning yet to come back. Clients are coming into our office, but really for brief moments to pick up paperwork and things like that. We are not doing the in-person relation things that we're doing, filling out applications right now, and we don't have a plan immediately to do that. I think that we really are watching the statistical information about Pasadena's positivity rate for COVID. I mean, I'm now up to my eyeballs in positivity information about Pasadena. And so we're really watching that. And it's got to drop some more before we're going to take that next step. If schools do reopen in some kind of hybrid model, the earliest in Pasadena it could happen is the middle of January. They've already made that announcement. Then we'll approach, could we go back to the schools? But we're really waiting for them because so much of what we do is all connected to the schools. So until they make a decision, we can't, some of the stuff we can't plan on. But it would be easy for us to go back. The hard part was when we couldn't go. We could turn on a dime and go back in the classroom tomorrow. That would be easy. This part was the hard part. So at this moment, we don't have any plans to go back immediately. We're still, I mean, a lot of our staff we're back in the office now. Or people are not, some people are in, some people are out, but we're still being very, very safety conscious about even those of us who are in the office sometimes now. So right now we don't have a plan at this moment.
Okay. Really interesting and good to know. And yeah, and it's ever changing, right? You know, we can say right now we have this plan to return or to change, and it's just that constant management, which has been life for the past 7 months.
Yeah.
I realize we only have a couple minutes left. I think we could probably go on for a couple of hours with you three amazing leaders. But I want to end with a question. Listening to all of you talk about your experiences, your organization's experiences over the past 7 months, I have to know, how are you taking care of yourselves? How are you helping your staff take care of themselves? This is a lot of stress, a tremendous amount of stress and work in a sector that already has a lot of stress and a lot of work, even in the best of times. So we could just go around and Anna Rose, maybe we can start with you and just kind of share any bits of wisdom you have about taking care of yourself in the nonprofit sector these days.
Sure. Well, I'm actually going to start with the staff side, which is, one of the things that we have implemented is a weekly staff meeting. And while we do give updates about what we're working on at work, we also focus on just like how people are doing and what they're doing. We talk a lot about baking. That's a hot topic about what people have been baking for the week, just as more of a check-in. I think when this first started, my big concern, which I shared the other day, is that my staff wasn't taking breaks. And so if I see people we work 10 to 6. So if I see people on chat after 6, I'm like, it can wait till tomorrow. Have a good night. Just as like a little ping to remind them to get up and walk away from their desk. And then I also am doing a Monday check-in with the leadership team that we do. And it is also more just like, what's happening this week and where are you at? And, what are you grappling with right now? For myself, I would say, you talked at the beginning about Southern California and the commute. And one of the things that I have found that is so helpful for self-care is when my day is over, I close my computer and I can walk out and immediately like jump into making dinner and listening to some music, or taking time to go for walks around the neighborhood that I was spending in the car before.
That's great.
I think we too were worried about the staff. After we sort of got over the shock of it all, I think we started to try and implement some fun things into our staff meetings that we were doing once a week. We usually do them once a month, and now we're doing once a week. And so we did some funny things that, one of the things that the day we shut down, I sent all this goofy stuff home with staff. They had no idea why I was sending it to them. Honestly, I didn't know either. I thought I'd figure it out later. But it was things like masks. I mean, fun, like animal masks. I don't even know why we had them here, but we did. Coloring books, all kinds of stuff. And then I would just like make stuff up about what we should do with this. And then they had to wear their masks to a meeting one day. And we tried to do some fun stuff that we would, you know, just to kind of keep the ball rolling and check in, like Anna Rose saying, about how are people doing. Strangely, we had a couple people in our office lose parents during this time, not even from COVID, you know, not from COVID, but people's, you know, in normal circumstances, we would just be like all over each other, trying to support each other in these situations. And so now we had to do it sort of online. The staff really, I think, suffered from that lack of togetherness. I think that's something that has driven our staff, and we could be a very tight group, and it's been really hard to be apart from each other. So we had to sort of invent things too. One of the things we did, I bet you this was about early May, we just said to everybody, you don't have to work on Wednesday, go do something to take care of yourself and take pictures and send them to us. And we just gave everybody a day off, and we got all these funny pictures of things that people did. You know, someone was cleaning baseboards. Okay, that isn't exactly what we had in mind, but if that made you feel good, go for it, baby. You know, other people gardened, other people went for, you know, and we got people to talk about what they were doing to take care of themselves. As for me, I have not been very good about it at all. I have been baking and eating, and that is not good. But I will happy to say that just this morning, I was able to make an appointment for something that I've really missed. One of the self-care things I've been doing for a few years now is having a massage once a month. And you know, that all closed. And I have really, really missed it. And today I found out they were open. And so I made an appointment for Sunday, and I will be living for 3 o'clock on Sunday when I can go have a massage. So, I mean, it seems like such a little thing, but I am so excited about it. And I'll wear a mask. I don't care, put saran wrap on my face. I just need a massage. So, you know, I think it's hard for us. I'm often I'm better at taking care of other people than I am myself. And it's something you have to remind yourself to do.
It's so true.
No.
Molly, anything from Girls on the Run you can share? How you all?
I would say I feel very, very repetitive in this moment, because for sure staff first, like what can I do for them? Probably many of us share that in common as a trait. And that has really just been monitoring workload. That has been the very biggest thing, because it's very easy to get sucked in, especially when you're working from home and do nothing else. So monitoring workload and trying to lighten the load there and force it if I have to. And for myself, Suzanne, you probably will be surprised by what I'm going to say here, but actually exercising. And I know I
shocking
with an organization that actually promotes physical activity, but it isn't always my thing, to be honest. But it has really helped. And for those of you who want one other thing, this is not something I normally would have done, but Monterey Bay Aquarium has a thing called meditation. It's a meditation showing like jellyfish, or it is wonderful. So cool. Isn't it cool?
Yes.
That is a great way to start your day, meditation. I think those are probably the biggest things.
That's great. I'm looking that up as soon as we get off meditation.
So cool. It's really cool.
Thank you so much. This has been fantastic, inspiring, but also very real. Like, this is what we're dealing with, and this is how, you know, individual organization as a sector, we're going to muddle through. We're going to get through this together. So thank you for your time and your wisdom. Everybody's hung in there for us for this awesome conversation. We'll be sending out the slides. We'll also send out some links, including Envision's launching a podcast. We have recorded 6 episodes. It's amazing, with Matt Kamen, Nonprofit on the Rocks. So look out for our podcast very soon. And I hope everybody has a wonderful day. Thank you again for joining.